O céu é um campo de batalha. Homem e máquina em combate mortal. Em um segundo, o piloto é o predador. No seguinte, a presa. Seu instinto e sua coragem determinarão se ele vive ou morre. Dos primeiros biplanos aos avançados jatos, das metralhadoras aos mísseis. Através de moderna animação computadorizada, você estará dentro da cabine com os maiores ases da história. Viva a batalha, analise as táticas, reviva os duelos aéreos. Duelos aéreos. Caças patrulham céus inimigos. A qualquer momento, um caça inimigo pode atacar. Os pilotos têm segundos para reagir, segundos para viver ou se transformar em uma bola de fogo.
I liken it to gladiator work. These are fights to the death, and it only ends when you kill him or he kills you. And they're vicious, violent. They end in a big explosion, a lot of fire, the planes burn. That's what it's about.
Living or dying depends on winning or losing. And you win and you live.
It was a game, in a way. It was the world's most dangerous game.
The first time you are at the controls by yourself and depart Mother Earth, you're changed forever. Forever.
Jatos supersônicos. Mísseis a laser. Controles computadorizados que fundem o piloto e o avião em uma única entidade mortífera. Essas são as ferramentas do duelo aéreo moderno. Mas as táticas nasceram em uma época de lonas, madeira e arame. 1914, o início da Primeira Guerra Mundial. Apenas uma década desde a invenção do avião. A guerra foi travada em terra e no mar, e pela primeira vez, no ar. Aeronaves eram algo novo. Pequenas, lentas e frágeis, foram usadas para observar o movimento do inimigo. Em pouco tempo, os pilotos começaram a disparar uns nos outros.
Manfred von Richthofen, the famous Red Baron, his first 2 kills were, I believe, from the back seat with a shotgun. They said, though, there's got to be a better way. They mounted a machine gun back there.
Mas o lugar ideal para as metralhadoras era na frente do avião. O piloto miraria o avião e puxaria o gatilho. Não havia como sincronizar os disparos da metralhadora com a hélice. Os pilotos atingiam suas próprias pás. No outono de 1915, o projetista holandês Anton Fokker, trabalhando com os alemães, revolucionou a guerra aérea com uma nova invenção.
The interrupter gear would set forth a series of lever movements. It would prevent the machine gun from firing when the propeller was right in front of the machine gun.
Foi um grande sucesso. Os alemães criaram o primeiro caça verdadeiro. Os aliados encontraram um caça alemão abatido com a engrenagem interruptora intacta e a copiaram. Os céus se tornaram um campo de batalha.
The early days of fighter aviation were pretty colorful. 1 in 4 of the fighter pilots didn't survive training. It was a high casualty business back in the early days.
O guerreiro que abatesse 5 aviões ganhava um título novo, o As.
Only 1 pilot out of 20 becomes an ace, meets that magic 5 victory mark.
Mas não havia regras estabelecidas. Era tentativa e erro. E erro significava morte certa. A média de vida de um novo piloto era de 3 semanas.
These men were very, very brave men. The aircraft could disintegrate. The airplane could just catch on fire. The airplanes had no brakes, no oxygen.
They didn't have parachutes. If the airplane was put out of action, they went down with it because there's no way to get out.
Em setembro de 1916, o maior asa alemão, Oswald Boca, publicou a doutrina do combate aéreo. Suas 8 regras estão em um manual chamado Dicta Boca. Regra 1. Mantenha o sol atrás de você para dissimular sua posição. Regra 2. Prossiga seu ataque. Se você fugir, torna-se um alvo fácil. Regra 3. Dispare só de curta distância para garantir o impacto e economizar munição. Regra 4. Vigie seu adversário. Cuidado com seus truques. Regra 5. Ataque pela retaguarda. A vulnerável posição 6 horas. Regra 6. Se for atacado, volte-se contra seu adversário. Force-o a ficar na defensiva. Regra 7. Em céus inimigos, mantenha sua linha de retirada. Regra 8. Ataque em grupos, com cada avião mirando seu próprio adversário. Pilotos dos dois lados aprendiam essas regras logo ou morriam. Em 1917, a América entrou na guerra sem um caça avançado o suficiente. Eles usaram aviões franceses como o poderoso Spad 13. Entre os americanos, havia um audacioso piloto de corrida mundialmente famoso chamado Ed Rickenbacker.
Parti com Pershing como motorista do Estado-Maior, com o contingente original que foi a Primeira Guerra Mundial.
Ansioso por ação, logo foi transferido para a escola de aviação.
There are natural pilots and there are mechanical pilots. And there are those who are sort of in between. He was natural.
Rickenbacker teve sua primeira vitória no dia 29 de abril de 1918. Em setembro, era o piloto de caça americano com o melhor resultado, 8 marcas, o que fez dele o as dos ases.
He had a tremendous desire to be the leading ace and to fly fighters, and he knew he could do it.
Mas o título de As dos Ases historicamente trouxe 2 consequências: fama e morte. O capitão Rickenbacker escreveu: o título trouxe um destino inevitável que dominara a todos que o tinham conquistado antes. Comecei a ter essa superstição, o fardo mais pesado que carreguei no ar. Mas eu não podia esquecer que a vida de um portador de um título assim é curta. No dia 24 de setembro de 1918, Rickenbacker recebeu o comando da 94ª Esquadrilha Aérea. Chamada de esquadrilha pronta para a luta, abateu quase 70 aviões durante a guerra, mais do que qualquer outro grupo de caças. Rickenbacker prometeu a seus homens que lideraria pelo exemplo. No dia seguinte, 25 de setembro, ele decolou sozinho em seu Spad 13 para cumprir a promessa. Agora, você está na cabine com Rickenbacker, indo para seu lendário duelo, reconstituído pela primeira vez na mais moderna animação computadorizada. Rickenbacker tem o céu todo para ele. Então, ele avista à distância 2 grandes manchas abaixo dele. São 2 aviões de observação LVG alemães, alvos perfeitos, mas eles não estão sós. Ligeiramente atrás e 300 metros acima dos LVGs estão 5 mortíferos caças Fokker D-7.
The Fokker D-7, without a doubt, was the best fighter plane of World War I. It had a very strong engine. It had low maintenance problems. The Spad was a very good aircraft too. Very sturdy, and it was really great in a dive.
O Spad de Rickenbacker é mais veloz do que o Fokker alemão. Os 2 aviões estão igualmente armados, mas o Fokker é mais manobrável. Diante de 7 contra 1, a maioria dos pilotos desistiria e fugiria, mas não Rickenbacker. Ele sobe seguindo a primeira regra de Boca.
He comes out of the sun. That's important. He has the sun to his back and they can't see him.
Quando a formação inimiga passa, Rickenbacker desliga seu motor. Isso lhe permite atacar silenciosamente e eliminar a vibração do motor, que é tão violenta que pode arruinar a mira do piloto. Rickenbacker aponta para baixo em um forte mergulho.
he realizes that he has a chance to attack from the rear quarter. He chooses to pursue his attack on the tail-end Charlie, or that last fighting aircraft, that Fokker.
Rickenbacker aplica a quinta regra de Boca, atacar na posição das 6 horas. O Fokker avista Rickenbacker, tarde demais. Rickenbacker dispara com suas 2 metralhadoras Vickers calibre 30. Os 4 Fokkers restantes, atônitos com o súbito ataque de Rickenbacker, se dispersam. Eles sabem que foram atacados, mas não sabem de onde nem por quantos. Levará tempo para descobrirem que há apenas um inimigo. Tempo para que seu líder, sem rádio e apenas com sinais de mão, reorganize o grupo.
So he realizes now they're no longer going to be a factor to him. So he then chooses to go ahead and continue on to attack those reconnaissance aircraft.
Os Fokkers se dispersam e deixam os LVGs desprotegidos. Os LVGs avistam Rickenbacker e tentam se salvar. Eles mergulham. Os aviões se separam. As metralhadoras traseiras disparam, mas Rickenbacker está fora de alcance. Ele mergulha para sair da linha de tiro. Esse mergulho o leva para baixo dos alemães. Ele sobe quase verticalmente para atacar a barriga vulnerável do avião mais próximo. O LVG mais próximo abaixa a cauda, dando ao seu atirador uma visão clara de Rickenbacker. Então, o segundo LVG surge na cauda de Rickenbacker, cuspindo uma saraivada mortal de balas sobre seu SPAD. Rickenbacker fica preso em um fogo cruzado e em grande perigo. Em 25 de setembro de 1918, o AS americano Ed Rickenbacker, atrás das linhas inimigas, atacou 7 aviões alemães. Ele abateu um Fokker, fazendo com que a escolta de caças se dispersasse. Ele pressiona seu ataque sobre 2 aviões de reconhecimento LVG fortemente armados. Os 4 Fokkers restantes ainda tentam se reagrupar. Com os tiros dos LVGs, balas luminosas riscam o ar próximas da cabine de Rickenbacker.
So now, Captain Rickenbacker has to find a way to maneuver his aircraft into a position where the LVGs can't shoot. It's pretty tough.
Rickenbacker voa para cima para ganhar altitude e sair de alcance. Depois, ele vira e mergulha para atacar o LVG mais próximo. O LVG tem uma metralhadora Parabellum 7.9 2mm. Pode disparar 700 balas por minuto, 200 balas mais do que o SPAD ou o Fokker, o que dá ao LVG uma chance maior.
These two-seaters were very, very dangerous. They were as dangerous as a single-seater Fokker.
O fogo dos LVGs frustra um ataque. Rickenbacker, ignorando o perigo, repete sua tática e mergulha sob o LVG para preparar seu ataque e sair da linha de fogo. Ele sobe para atingir a barriga vulnerável do LVG, mas o pesado fogo cruzado o força a se virar e mergulhar para atacar novamente. Os alemães são guerreiros experientes.
The Germans were particularly skilled in the dogfight. You just didn't realize the environment you were getting into.
Most of their fighter pilots had extensive experience flying two-seaters on the Russian front. As you also might expect, the Germans saw fighting as a duty.
The World War I German pilots were very effective, amazing amount of kills. They were fighting over their homeland. They actually started teaching tactics. I'd imagine that's part of the reason why they became so effective.
O LVG de novo desliza lateralmente, permitindo ao atirador na parte de trás uma visão clara de Rickenbacker. Novamente, Rickenbacker é obrigado a subir, virar e mergulhar para um novo ataque. Mas os alemães seguem a mesma defesa e Rickenbacker é preso no fogo cruzado. Então, de súbito, os LVGs inexplicavelmente cometem um erro fatal.
On the 4th pass, for reasons which no one will ever know, the two LVGs separated and gave him some space.
Fora do fogo cruzado, Rickenbacker usa a abertura para atacar o LVG mais próximo. A escolta de Fokkers se reagrupara e se lança para resgatar o LVG sobrevivente. Rickenbacker vê os Fokkers mergulhando em sua direção e decide que 2 aviões abatidos bastam.
The 4 Fokker D-7s did not follow him. That's not unusual for either side to say the fight is over and we've had enough.
Ele enfrentara a desproporção de 1 para 7, destruíra 2 dos inimigos e escapara para lutar de novo.
Voltei da Primeira Guerra Mundial sem um arranhão. Foram mais de 150, eu diria 160 combates contra o inimigo, nos quais abati 26 aviões.
Hoover condecora o famoso as, Capitão Rickenbacker. Sua ação de 25 de setembro rendeu-lhe a Medalha de Honra do Congresso.
I knew that I wanted to be like him. He was my knight in shining armor from the time I was about 8 years old.
Rickenbacker escreveu: coragem é fazer o que você tem medo de fazer. Não pode haver coragem se você não estiver com medo.
I interviewed a World War I ace, a guy who was 92, and I asked him one time, I said, "You ever get nightmares?" He said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "When was the last time you had one?" He said, "Last night." And I thought they'd kind of fade away with time, but they don't.
As táticas inauguradas pelos pilotos da Primeira Guerra Mundial venceram o teste do tempo e a marcha da tecnologia.
No matter how advanced our weapon systems or aircraft become, the tactics that Rickenbacker and Boelke and those guys developed in World War I are still applicable today.
Na Segunda Guerra Mundial, 20 anos depois, o caça evoluíra para uma poderosa arma mais de 480 km por hora mais rápida do que o Spad.
The changes between World War I fighters and World War II was power. We now have aircraft that have more horsepower, they can go faster, they can go higher. They also carried better weapon systems.
Eles carregavam mais armas de maior alcance, mais munição e um impacto maior do que as 2 metralhadoras calibre 30 do Spad. Aviões mais velozes e armas mais mortíferas significam menos tempo para reagir, menor margem de erro. Os céus da Segunda Guerra Mundial foram muito mais letais do que da Primeira. Desde 1943, os americanos lançaram maciços bombardeios diurnos no coração da Alemanha, que estava além da autonomia das escoltas. Esperava-se que os bombardeiros fortemente armados se defendessem contra enxames de caças inimigos.
The daylight raids proved to be quite unsuccessful, and we suffered some heavy losses, losing as many as almost 60 bombers during one mission.
As perdas aumentavam. 6 de setembro de 1943, 45 B-17 destruídos. 14 de outubro de 1943, 65 B-17 destruídos por 110 caças alemães. A Força Aérea chamou de Terça-feira Negra.
Men went down on that day, and it almost put an end to the daylight bombing. They said, now we gotta have fighter escort. Well, we just can't do this without it.
No fim de 1943, os aliados finalmente tiveram um caça com uma autonomia de 3.330 quilômetros, o suficiente para escoltar os bombardeiros dentro do território alemão, o Mustang P-51. Em dezembro de 1943, eles começaram a defender os bombardeiros, obrigando a Luftwaffe a duelar em seus próprios céus. 27 de maio de 1944, B-17 americanos decolaram das bases no sul da Inglaterra. Logo, estavam nos céus da França. A missão: destruir fábricas de combustível sintético nazistas na Alemanha. A enorme formação foi escoltada pelos Mustangs P-51. Liderando um grupo de 4 Mustangs estava o Old Crow, pilotado pelo capitão Clarence Bud Anderson.
I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in flying. I mean, I had that desire to fly as far back as I can remember in my life.
Ele entrou para a Força Aérea em setembro de 1942 e se tornou um piloto de caça. Um ano depois, Anderson foi para a Inglaterra para combater a Luftwaffe. Seu grupo de caças, o de número 357, se tornaria a primeira unidade de Mustangs P-51 na 8ª Força Aérea. Agora você está na cabine com 4 caças alemães desafiando Bud Anderson em um dos mais eletrizantes duelos aéreos da Segunda Guerra Mundial. 27 de maio de 1944, os 4 Mustangs P-51 de Bud Anderson escoltam uma missão americana de bombardeio. Reviva agora o duelo aéreo em que ele enfrenta uma esquadrilha de mortíferos ME-109 alemães. São 2 oponentes formidáveis. O Mustang P-51 é um dos melhores caças dos aliados.
It was a tremendous airplane. It was good at high altitude, good at low altitude. It was very maneuverable. I think in the hands of a good pilot, it could hold its own or do better than any of the enemy airplanes.
O ME-109 começou sua carreira em 1937. Era o favorito da Luftwaffe. Mais de 35 mil unidades foram produzidas, mais do que qualquer outro caça da história.
The strengths of the 109 were that it was a very small but very fast aircraft. It was very difficult to see. It had a very low profile, and it also had a very good zoom rate. It could climb very quickly.
O P-51 é mais veloz e faz curvas mais fechadas. Voa 900 metros mais alto do que o M-109. Mas o M-109 tem mais armamento e é um veterano experiente em combate, como os homens que os pilotam.
The German pilots had so much more experience and so much more flying time than the Allied fighter aircraft. Some of these pilots have been flying since 1935 and flew into the 40s, and this is one of the reasons why you saw such incredible kill rates, with some of these pilots getting 200 or 300 aerial victories.
Anderson tem uma vantagem que faltava aos pilotos de caça da Primeira Guerra Mundial. Melhorias em eletrônica agora permitem que os aviões tenham rádio.
We hear on the radio that up front ahead of us they were being attacked. My wingman's on the inside. He calls out, "Hey, we got 4 bogies, unidentified airplanes attacking us, coming down on us from 5 o'clock high. We're very vulnerable."
Os primeiros movimentos de um duelo aéreo são críticos. Anderson pode ir para a esquerda, para a direita, ir direto, subir ou mergulhar. Se Bud for para a esquerda, está em ângulo de ataque. Se for para a frente, o Messerschmitt, com o mergulho dando-lhe velocidade superior, o dominará. Sua única esperança é quebrar para a direita. O alemão está rápido demais para fazer uma curva fechada.
So we turn like this very hard.
A esquadrilha de Bud faz um meio círculo e arremete em direção aos alemães. Os 2 grupos se cruzam. Os alemães viram para a esquerda, assim como os Mustangs. É um jogo mortal de caçador e caça, com os 2 lados tentando alcançar a posição das 6 horas sobre o outro.
Now we got 4 ME-109s. And got 4 Mustangs coming around. They want to fight. So they're coming around, and we're coming around now in a big left circle. This goes about 2 times. Each time we come around, I'm a little closer to getting in trail with them. So we've turned their advantage now to our advantage.
Bud está aqui. Os alemães aqui. A curva mais fechada do Mustang lhes dá um rastro por dentro. O raio menor da volta permite que os Mustangs se aproximem. O plano de Anderson, usar essa vantagem para chegar à cauda do ME-109, alinhar e abrir fogo.
You do all this stuff by instinct. You don't have it all figured out. You do it instinctively.
As 4 metralhadoras calibre 50 dos Mustangs carregam perto de 1.300 balas. Mas isso representa apenas 20 segundos de munição. Anderson precisa fazer com que cada tiro seja válido.
We were all young, indestructible, I hope. I knew it was a lie, but you had to think that way.
Os alemães avistam os Mustangs se aproximando e tentam fugir. Mas, com velocidade máxima de 700 km por hora, o Mustang é mais de 80 km por hora mais veloz do que o ME-109. Então, um dos alemães se separa do grupo e sobe.
I'm looking at this guy and I don't want to get too far up or he can drop down on me.
Anderson manda 2 de seus Mustangs, liderados por Ed Simpson, atrás dele. Bud e seu apoio, John Scarra, continuam atrás dos outros 3 ME-109. Ele usa a velocidade maior do Mustang e chega a 275 metros do Messerschmitt.
When you shoot somebody down, the best way to do it is to get right here, what we call 6 o'clock. That's what I did with this guy.
O 109 atingido faz algo que impressiona Anderson. Ele continua voando de cabeça para baixo.
And I thought, what the heck's he doing, you know? If he's going to run away, he just would roll over and pull away. I'm sitting there right side up very comfortably and pump some more shells into him.
Foi o 6º avião abatido por Anderson na guerra. Agora eram 2 contra 2. Bud sabe que os alemães estão nervosos. Seus aviões estremecem, com seus pilotos tensos, pressionando a alavanca de comando e olhando por cima dos ombros. Um deles mergulha para fugir. O outro sobe e se vira. Ele ainda quer lutar. Evidentemente, é um piloto de caça experiente.
When you saw a German airplane, you treated him like the Red Baron. I mean, you used every advantage you had over him, and without the knowledge of knowing who was in that airplane.
Bud tenta seguir o ME-109. O alemão vira para a esquerda. Bud percebe que ele está indo rápido demais para fazer a curva. Ele passa o alemão e sobe, tentando ganhar a vantagem. Bud está agora sobre o alemão. Se o alemão continuar a curva, Bud pode cair sobre ele. Se ele mergulhar, Anderson pode partir para a caça. Mas o ME-109 habilmente reverte a curva, faz um esforço para a direita e fica atrás dos Mustangs. Bud está na frente. Seu apoio, John Scarra, está bem atrás. Agora é Scarra que tem o alemão em sua cauda. Anderson diz para Scarra mergulhar, esperando que o alemão o siga.
I'll drop in behind him. Maybe we can get him that way. So John did that. Sure enough, boy, he went right after him.
A mais de 640 km por hora, Bud mergulha atrás do ME-109 que ainda está atrás de Scarra.
He sees that right away. He comes out, straightens out, pulls away, then he comes around on this hard turn again.
Os alemães fizeram a mesma manobra, virada à esquerda, curva à direita. Usando a 5ª regra de Boca, agora ele está na cauda de Bud.
Now I've got the problem, so I pull the airplane up as steep as I want to, full power, got everything just going as I can. I know that I've got a little more energy than he is, but I'm thinking about plan B.
Na mente de Bud, ele sabe que energia ou velocidade é vida. Anderson está encrencado. É o único momento em sua carreira na Força Aérea que um caça inimigo está atrás dele, quase fazendo um ataque perfeito.
Here you are, one-on-one. Kill or be killed. There's big odds that you might not make it. You might be killed in this thing. And you wonder inside, how am I going to perform personally? Am I going to run or am I going to fight? You don't know. I mean, you can train, but the actual thing is real. It's real.
Um disparo do canhão 30mm alemão pode despedaçar seu Mustang. Em segundos, a vida ou a morte. O asa americano Bud Anderson abateu um caça alemão. Agora, outro ME-109 está colado em sua cauda. Anderson sobe para tentar se salvar.
I can see that hole in the prop where the big cannon is, and I'm in big trouble if he can get that gun pointed right at me.
O canhão Rheinmetall Borsig 108 dispara 650 balas 30 mm por minuto. Sua bala é quase 3 vezes maior do que a calibre 50 do P-51. 5 tiros podiam abater um B-17. Um tiro podia estraçalhar o Mustang de Anderson.
I look back there and, man, that thing looked like an elephant gun to me. I'm pulling up. We're both losing airspeed at a pretty significant rate. And pretty soon one of us is going to stall first, and whoever does that is going to be in big trouble.
Quando um avião sobe direto, ele desafia a gravidade, perde velocidade e finalmente entra em stall e cai. Se o alemão estolar primeiro, Bud mergulhará atrás dele. Mas se Anderson estolar primeiro, ele deslizará abaixo do ME-109 e será pulverizado dos céus. Os dois aviões sobem muito no limite de suas possibilidades. A adrenalina dos pilotos pulsa enquanto eles sobem para salvar suas vidas.
He has to lead me. And he's actually below me. I see him pulling, so I'm pulling. We're both pulling.
Com toda a força, Bud levou seu P-51 ao limite. Então, Anderson vê sua prece se concretizar.
I see the airplane shudder. He's starting to lose control.
O alemão perde velocidade e sustentação, estremece, estola e cai. 2 segundos depois, o Mustang de Anderson, mais potente, estremece, mas não para. Ele mergulha atrás do alemão. Anderson passara de presa a caçador. O ME-109 recupera o controle e vira fechado para a sua esquerda. Anderson decide ir atrás, mas isso requer um movimento astuto e perigoso. O alemão está aqui. Anderson está aqui, atrás dele. O alemão continua sua curva à esquerda. Bud tenta segui-lo. Se não conseguir, estará na frente do alemão sem velocidade, uma presa certa. Bud aposta sua vida na certeza de que seu Mustang fará a curva. E faz. Anderson agora está bem atrás do ME-109. Agora é o alemão quem sobe, tentando escapar. Anderson sabe que o Messerschmitt vai parar antes que ele e fica bem atrás do alemão.
I start firing right in here, and I saw some tracers go across his right wing a little bit. I pushed a little bit of left rudder, and then pow! I hit him right in the middle, right in the wing root, all around the cockpit and engine area. Tremendous white vapor came out initially.
O alemão foi atingido, mas seu avião ainda estava intacto.
And then he just suspended in the air. I'm so close I can see the wheel well and the rivets and the grease and everything. He just rolls over and goes down. I followed him down through 20,000 feet. I was going faster than I ever been in my life. I was going too fast, and I pulled the throttle back. Well, he was smoking now. He's just black smoke pouring out. It must have been a mile long, and he's just going straight down. I see his shadow, and he and his shadow met.
Foi um dia triunfal para Anderson e para os 3 outros Mustangs. Atacados por 4 aviões inimigos, eles neutralizaram o ataque e viraram o jogo, destruindo 3 deles. Dos bombardeiros B-17 daquela missão e escoltados pelos Mustangs, apenas 12 se perderam. Os alemães perderam mais de 34 caças. Os ataques às fábricas de combustível sintético foram um sucesso. Em apenas 2 meses, a produção de combustível da Alemanha foi cortada pela metade. O Mustang e homens como Bud Anderson salvaram a campanha de bombardeio de Ulm. Também salvaram milhares de vidas e transformaram uma derrota aliada em vitória. Com os alemães perdendo seus pilotos veteranos, os substitutos jovens precariamente treinados se tornaram alvos fáceis para os caças aliados. No final da guerra, os aliados dizimaram a outrora poderosa Luftwaffe e controlaram os céus sobre a Alemanha. Anderson voou 116 missões em seu Old Crow. Abateu 16 aviões. Ele nunca se feriu gravemente. Mas alguns de seus companheiros de esquadrilha não tiveram tanta sorte.
I had a tremendous relationship with the members of my squadron. I thought so much of them that I actually named my son after two of them, and both of them were killed in combat. Jim Browning was one. He later got shot down when he made a head-on pass with a German jet, Me-262, and they collided. Both of them were killed. Eddie Simpson was the other one. He was my wingman.
Anderson permaneceu na Força Aérea dos Estados Unidos, servindo na Coreia pós-guerra e combatendo no Vietnã. Aposentou-se em 1972. Chuck Yeager, seu amigo e parceiro de esquadrilha, diz: Bud Anderson é o melhor piloto de caça que conheci. O caça de motor a pistão chegou ao seu apogeu na Segunda Guerra Mundial. Mesmo antes da guerra acabar, seus dias estavam contados, e o som do combate aéreo mudaria para sempre. Os dois lados desenvolveram jatos perto do fim da guerra, mas o ME-261 alemão foi um tremendo choque para os aliados. Os alemães descobriram que asas voltadas para trás aumentavam a velocidade e seus poderosos motores a jato faziam-no 160 km por hora mais rápido do que o Mustang, impossível de ser alcançado. Felizmente, eram poucos e era tarde demais para reverter a vitória dos aliados. Com o fim da guerra, tanto o Ocidente quanto o Oriente perceberam que jatos eram o futuro. Jatos são mais velozes, mas seus motores consomem muito combustível, criando novos problemas.
One, you were restricted in range compared to your P-51 in War II. Things happen at greater range, faster. Closure rates, turn radius larger.
Eles aceleram o ritmo do duelo aéreo. Há menos tempo para avistar o inimigo. A velocidade de aproximação, chamada de fusão, foi cortada pela metade. Máquinas podem ser mudadas para aguentar o desgaste maior, mas o homem na cabine não. Viradas em velocidade extrema criam forças G que pressionam o piloto para além dos limites humanos.
Someone weighs 200 pounds. A force of 5 Gs would be the equivalent of 1,000 pounds pushing down on them. 7.5 Gs would be equivalent of 1,500 pounds. It feels like it's taking your face and it's stretching it down over your knees, down onto the floor.
The main result of that force is causing the blood to pool in the lower extremities. First thing affected the eyes. Blood begins to drain out of the eye and begin to lose vision. So someone who is not prepared to handle that quick onset of G can very easily black out and pass out.
Velocidades maiores requerem roupas especiais que protejam os pilotos contra as enormes pressões das forças G. Especialistas previram que a velocidade crescente dos jatos e o estresse sobre os pilotos tornariam o duelo aéreo obsoleto. Essa teoria logo foi colocada em teste. Junho de 1950. 6 divisões do Exército Popular da Coreia do Norte atravessam o Paralelo 38, a fronteira entre o norte e o sul da Coreia. O Ocidente e o Oriente estão em guerra, e pela primeira vez, jatos enfrentam jatos. O Major Frederick Butz Blesse mostrou que estava à altura do desafio. Ele se tornou o maior asa americano na Coreia. Ser um piloto de caça estava no sangue de Blesse desde a infância.
I'd want to be an ace since I first started reading about Eddie Rickenbacker in the 1920s. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to West Point, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and then I wanted to be as good a fighter pilot as the Air Force had.
Ele se formou na West Point em 1945, tarde demais para combater na Segunda Guerra Mundial. Ele compensou esse fato na Coreia voando mais de 200 missões. O objetivo de muitas dessas missões era simples: abater caças inimigos. Desde novembro de 1950, os céus eram dominados por um adversário veloz, capaz de grande altitude, o famoso MiG-15. Alguns MiGs eram conduzidos por pilotos norte-coreanos e chineses treinados apressadamente, mas outros eram secretamente pilotados por russos. Esses veteranos pilotos de caça da Segunda Guerra Mundial eram experientes e bem treinados.
The MiG was a formidable opponent because it would do a lot of things that you couldn't do. And the main thing you had to be careful of was not fighting his fight. The MiG had a better climb rate and a better turn rate at 15 and 25,000 feet, and above 25,000, it had about twice the rate of climb as the F-86 did.
O MiG também era fortemente armado com um canhão 37 mm e duas metralhadoras 23 mm. O único caça americano que podia enfrentar o MiG-15 era o Sabre F-86. Construído pela North American Aviation, a companhia que criara o Mustang, o Sabre fora projetado sobre pesquisas em avião alemão capturado. Foi o primeiro caça com asas para trás nas Forças Armadas Americanas. O Sabre portava 6 metralhadoras calibre 50. Apesar de ideais para jatos, faltava-lhes o brutal poder do canhão russo do MiG. O Sabre podia mergulhar mais rápido do que o MiG e era mais estável. Sua mira guiada por radar era mais precisa, mas o MiG-15 podia subir mais alto e mais rápido e tinha mais armas. 2 de outubro de 1952, Butz Blesse está em uma situação crítica. Ele estava sobre a Coreia do Norte, a 320 quilômetros de sua base. Seu Sabre F-86 tinha pouco combustível, e ele foi surpreendido por uma esquadrilha de 4 MiGs-15. Agora, entre na cabine para um dos maiores duelos da Guerra da Coreia. – 2 de outubro de 1952. Major Frederick Butz Blesse lidera sua 123ª missão. Sua esquadrilha de 4 F-86 está em uma missão de caça atrás de aviões inimigos sobre o pedaço de céu mais perigoso da guerra. MiG Alley. Estende-se no extremo nordeste do Mar Amarelo, ao longo do rio Yalu. MiGs partem de suas bases, atacam bombardeiros americanos e depois voltam rapidamente sobre a fronteira chinesa. Os MiGs têm uma enorme vantagem, estão perto de suas bases. Os Sabres estão a várias centenas de quilômetros de suas bases e levam combustível suficiente apenas para 20 minutos sobre MiG Alley. Blesse e sua esquadrilha estão quase no fim de sua patrulha.
We had 4 guys, and the number 4 man was the new guy, but the element leader had some problems with his fuel system.
Blesse mandou o líder da formação de volta à base, escoltado por um dos outros Sabres. Ele manteve o piloto novo, inexperiente.
Eventually, we got down to the point where we were well into Manchuria and said, okay, it's time to go home.
Voando a 9.500 metros, eles se voltam para o sul. Estão 320 quilômetros longe da base, com muito território inimigo para atravessar.
We were still well north of Sinuiju in North Korea, and I see 4 MiGs above me about 8 or 10,000 feet. We didn't have the fuel to fight. We were a hell of a long way from home, and we were really not quite over the water yet. It was not a good position.
Blesse mergulha para fugir dos MiGs. Mas o líder dos MiGs é mais esperto. Mesmo estando fora de alcance, ele atira, para amedrontar os americanos e forçá-los a cometer um erro. O canhão 23 mm e a metralhadora 37 mm cospem massas de fogo. O caça de apoio se separa de Blesse para a esquerda.
So, as soon as he broke out to the left like that, the 2 MiGs start cutting him off in the turn.
O apoio de Blesse cai na armadilha do MiG. O MiG corta por dentro da curva do Sabre, fazendo a aproximação.
And I called my wingman and said, put that sucker in a 4G turn and keep it there. And he just started a descending spiral. And the two MiGs are behind him trying to do the same thing.
A curva rápida e a espiral defensiva dificultam a mira dos MiGs.
And I'm behind those two MiGs. And I looked right after I got into a turn and started on these guys, I took a look to see what the other element was doing, and they're turning in on me. So we had a nifty little daisy chain going down with a 1-2, 1-2 deal.
A 5.500 metros, Blessé consegue a pausa de que precisa. O MiG mais próximo não aguenta a espiral e sai do movimento crítico.
And when he did that, I relaxed the G's on my airplane and lined him up in my gun sight.
Em uma espiral, as forças G pressionam as balas, tornando quase impossível um tiro preciso. Mas Blessé era um excelente atirador.
A bunch of stuff flew off of him, some stuff out of the engine puff, and off he went. He took off.
Isso deixa o MiG na cauda de seu piloto de apoio desprotegido. Ele gira e foge para evitar ser a próxima vítima de Blessé. Mas Blessé ainda tem dois MiGs atrás dele. Ele ordena que seu apoio volte para a base. Balas dos dois MiGs restantes passam raspando na cabine de Blessé.
I'm in a turn because these guys have just fired over my canopy. I increased the G's and made them slide out to the right. And then I started to reverse my turn.
Butz, usando seu treinamento e experiência, faz a volta para cima, reverte para o MiG, depois rola para um mergulho. Agora ele está acima e atrás dos MiGs, pronto para atacar.
And the minute I did that, this guy could see that he was going to be had if he didn't do something. So instead of trying to turn with me, he just rolled into me and headed for the deck, and his wingman went with him.
Blessé deixou que o MiG fugisse. Ele não tinha alternativa.
I didn't want to fight with him. I didn't have the fuel. But now I'm down to about 900 pounds, maybe 1,000 pounds of fuel. I'm damn near 200 miles from home. And I'm already starting to calculate whether I can make it or not.
Blessé sobe para economizar combustível e chega a 3.300 metros. Então, pelo canto do olho, um outro MiG, na posição de 10 horas, se aproximando rápido.
I thought, boy, school is really out. I can't even go one turn with this guy. I don't have the fuel. Above all, I've got to get out over the water.
Mas Blessé, ainda sobre a Coreia do Norte, está muito longe do mar controlado pelos aliados. A propaganda inimiga conhecia-o pelo nome. Como o maior as da América, ele era procurado como um troféu.
It hadn't been more than 2 weeks since Pyongyang Sally had been on the shortwave radio, and she said, "Oh, Major Blessé, I see you got your 8th kill today, but we're going to get you, and when we do, we're going to hang you from the Han River Bridge."
O MiG, surpreendentemente, não vê o Sabre de Blessé, que está abaixo e à direita. Blessé tem que fazer uma escolha difícil. O MiG está vulnerável, mas se Blessé partir para o ataque, talvez não tenha combustível para voltar para casa.
I'm thinking, why does this happen to me? When I go on mission after mission after mission, and I got all kinds of fuel, and I can't find them, and here I am when I don't barely have enough fuel to get to the water, and here's somebody to fight with. I said, oh, what the hell, why not? And I flipped it over into a turn, pulled up close to him. I came up underneath him and shot him down.
Foi seu 10º avião abatido, mas custou-lhe cerca de 100 preciosos litros de combustível. Sozinho, sobrevoando o território inimigo, Blessé está com problemas. 2 de outubro de 1952. No céu sobre a Coreia do Norte, Frederick Butz Blessé acabou de destruir um MiG inimigo, mas seus tanques de combustível estão perigosamente baixos.
I got three alternatives right now. I would like to get all the way home. If that doesn't happen, if the winds are wrong, I don't have enough fuel, maybe I can get to Pengyangdo.
A ilha Paengyongdo tem uma estação de radares aliada e 1.500 metros de praia de areia dura. Era um campo de aterrissagem de emergência, mas com riscos enormes.
The only problem with it was it had about a 50-foot cliff on each end of the landing strip. But if you're looking at bailing out into the third most shark-infested bay in the world, or maybe taking a crack at that 5,000-foot runway, it doesn't look too bad.
Blessé ainda espera conseguir chegar à sua base em Campbell. Ele desliga seu motor para economizar as últimas gotas de combustível e plana a 180 nós, a melhor velocidade de planagem do Sabre. Mas em minutos, com seu Sabre perdendo altitude e com o vento contra, Blessé sabe que não conseguirá chegar a Campbell e nem mesmo a ilha Paengyongdo. Sua melhor chance é ejetar e cair no mar infestado de tubarões. Blessé religa seu motor, usa sua última gota de combustível, sobe a 4.000 metros e se dirige para a costa. Então, seu motor irrompe em chamas, sem combustível, bem sobre a Coreia do Norte.
I got over the coastline. Took a tremendous amount of fire.
Um pesado fogo antiaéreo 57 milímetros enche os céus. Sem combustível, Blessé não pode fazer nada para evitar os disparos que vêm do solo. As chamas queimam muito perto. A pressão do ar força as asas para cima, mas ele passa pelos tiros e se precipita para o mar, cruzando a costa a apenas 900 metros. Pelo rádio, 1 a 1, seus companheiros de esquadrilha tentam manter seu ânimo.
It still kind of chokes me up thinking about it. It was a very, very emotional moment for me. I remember after the last guy stopped, I sat there for a full 8 or 10 seconds and I thought, God, what a wonderful bunch of guys.
Ejetar de um avião a jato é extremamente perigoso. As súbitas forças de gravidade podem ocasionar sério dano na espinha. Braços e pernas, sem um firme controle, podem ser feridos pelo para-brisa da cobertura ou pelas paredes da cabine. Fora da cabine, a abertura do paraquedas pode repuxar o corpo novamente, agravando os ferimentos. Blessé é ejetado. Ele e seu assento, com o paraquedas preso, são expelidos do avião. Ele está com sorte, pois o paraquedas se abre e ele bate na água em segurança. Em 10 minutos chega Dumbo, o hidroavião de resgate, e debaixo do fogo inimigo resgata Blessé. No dia seguinte, Boots foi a uma coletiva de imprensa no Japão e depois para casa, com a marca de 10 aviões abatidos, o maior as de jatos da América. No fim da guerra, a Força Aérea tinha perdido 78 Sabres, mas tinha abatido 793 MiGs, uma proporção de 10 para 1. Essa supremacia aérea inúmeras vezes evitou que forças terrestres aliadas fossem empurradas para o mar.
We were dominant because we had a bunch of fighter pilots that were very highly experienced. And we had a good airplane, and we were taught ahead of time by our intelligence people what the MiG could do in relation to what we could do. That, coupled with hours and hours and hours of dogfighting in the U.S., down in our hearts somewhere, we thought the time is going to come when I can use all this.
Em 1955, depois da guerra, Blessé refletiu sobre as duras lições aprendidas na Coreia e escreveu: "Sem coragem, não há glória." Essas palavras tornaram-se uma bíblia para os pilotos de caças. Diferente das instruções gerais de Boca sobre combate aéreo, Sem Coragem Não Há Glória dava aos pilotos as táticas em todos os detalhes, as ferramentas para sobreviver e vencer.
No Guts, No Glory, great concepts on mutual support, which we still publish today. Basic defensive maneuvers that are put out in that are still applicable today.
Embora o Sabre, a 1.100 km por hora, fosse mais de 320 km por hora mais veloz do que o Mustang P-51 da Segunda Guerra Mundial, eles tinham algo em comum. Os dois lutavam com metralhadoras, o que significava chegar perto do inimigo. Mas a Marinha dos Estados Unidos, preocupada que ataques de bombardeiros soviéticos ameaçassem seus porta-aviões, precisava de uma arma que pudesse destruir o inimigo a longa distância. Em meados da década de 50, o míssil Sidewinder, movido a foguete, transformou o combate aéreo para sempre.
By the Vietnam era, the Sidewinder could accelerate in seconds to a speed of Mach 2.5, over 3 times faster than most jets. Their heat-seeking sensors can lock in on a target's tailpipe from over 2 miles. Improved missiles like the longer-range Sparrow follow. With the ability to kill far beyond gun range, the experts, as they had with the coming of jets, declare that dogfighting is obsolete.
Why did the experts think dogfighting was obsolete? Ha! That really evokes a flood of emotion, memories. Who were the experts, pray tell? People who'd been promoted beyond their capability, way beyond their usefulness, who'd never fought, who looked at manuals, who looked at, I don't know what the hell they looked at.
In the late 1950s and 1960s, dogfight training was minimized. The Navy's new interceptor, the F-4 Phantom, was designed to shoot down Soviet bombers only with long-range missiles.
Remember, the leadership didn't think there was going to be any more dogfights. It was only going to be shooting missiles at a Russian bomber coming across the ocean. So why would you need a gun? The Navy decided not to put a gun in the airplane. Mistake.
Some pilots, like Robin Olds, a World War II ace and future Vietnam commander, pushed for conventional dogfight training.
I was called in to account by my boss, who was a 2-star general in the basement of the Pentagon, who very mildly chiding me, "Robin, I'm tired of these staff studies of yours about our lack of conventional capability. Mind you, Colonel, we're never again going to fight a conventional war." And I looked at him and thinking to myself, "General, where have you been since 1945? What do you think we've been doing?"
The American reliance on high tech will face a dangerous and bloody reality. Early in the Vietnam War, the United States wasn't achieving the kind of air superiority it had in past wars.
There was a gentleman by the name of Captain Frank Ault that did a report called the Ault Report, because our senior admiral said, "Why do we shoot so many missiles and not hit anybody? What's going on?"
In 1969, Ault's report made 242 recommendations. There was one that stood out above all others.
He said, "The problem we're having is the pilots don't know how to dogfight. They've gotten away from the enclosed dogfight because we thought the technology was going to dictate that that was no longer a necessity."
In 1969, the Navy establishes Top Gun, the fighter weapons school, to teach pilots dogfighting. Here, fighter crews go through intensive training in air combat maneuvering and weapons systems employment. The 4-week course provides aviators instruction that simulates real combat conditions. The invaluable dogfight training from this school will help earn Randall Cunningham and Willie Driscoll a place in history over the skies of Vietnam. Commissioned into the Navy in 1967, Cunningham's love of John Wayne films and aggressive nature won him the nickname Duke.
I was with Duke Cunningham during the entire combat cruise, and he was 24 hours, 7 days a week. He would just as soon skip lunch and go read up something in the book. Very dedicated to his craft. And as I found out in reading up about gentlemen like Oswald Boelke and Manfred von Richthofen, they were the same way.
In 1972, Duke Cunningham is a pilot aboard the USS Constellation, flying the Navy's newest fighter, the F-4 Phantom. The Phantom divides the workload between 2 men, the pilot and the radar intercept officer, or RIO. Cunningham's RIO is Lieutenant J.G. Willie Irish Driscoll.
The idea behind it was to take some of the burden off the pilot so that he wouldn't have to worry about flying the plane, running the electronic countermeasures, deploying chaff and flares, running the radios, running the radar and all this. At the same time, working together, two sets of eyes and two sets of brains are better than one.
Cunningham and Driscoll train relentlessly together, becoming a formidable fighting team.
We knew each other's tendencies and strengths and weaknesses. We're welded at the hip, as brothers might be, when you go through something like that.
That training will be invaluable. On this day in 1972, they're heavily outnumbered in their F-4 Phantom over North Vietnam by a brutal range of Soviet-built fighters, including the notorious MiG-17. This modernized version of the MiG-15 is a nimble and formidable opponent. At low speed, it can easily outturn the Phantoms.
The thing that the MiG had was a small airplane, small size, hard to see.
Size wasn't the F-4's only disadvantage.
The F-4, large, bulky, leaves two big smoke trails when it's not an afterburner. Easy to see, therefore, at long distances. Whoever gets visual first has got a much better advantage. In fact, surprise is one of the elements in the combat arena that's historic.
With a top speed of nearly 1,500 miles per hour, the American F-4 Phantom is twice as fast as the MiG-17. Armed with 2 medium-range Sparrow and 4 short-range Sidewinder missiles, the F-4 can strike from over 25 miles away. The MiG is more agile than the Phantom, but the F-4 is faster and has a better rate of climb. The MiG's biggest advantage is its armament. In addition to missiles, it also carries short-range guns that the Phantom lacks. May 10, 1972. Randy Cunningham pilots the F-4 Phantom Showtime 100 into the skies of North Vietnam. Now, enter the cockpit and relive one of the most savage dogfights of the jet age. May 10, 1972. Randy Cunningham and Willie Driscoll in the F-4 Showtime 100 are on a 35-plane raid against the Hai Dong rail yards.
I remember it was a beautiful day, just wispy clouds going through the skies, and as you're climbing in a fighter and you're looking at that armada that you're joining and stuff, it's pretty awesome to look at the power, and at the same time, I'd already lost some good friends. It was deadly serious and earnest, and you didn't want to make mistakes.
Cunningham's Phantom is also armed with bombs for ground attack. The North Vietnamese are determined to shred the strike force. They launch MiGs from 5 airfields, protecting the rail yards with anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles, like the SAM SA-2. After dropping the bombs on enemy warehouses, Cunningham and Driscoll loiter to cover the A-7 attack aircraft, the Navy bombers. Cunningham's wingman is Brian Grant.
I told Willie, I said, look at that target we just hit, because we decimated the whole thing. We're secondary explosions. But about that time, Brian Grant spoke up and he said, Dukes, MiG-17's at 7 o'clock.
2 MiG-17s swooped down behind their 2 Phantoms. Tracers flash by their cockpit. The MiGs are traveling fast. Cunningham knows at top speed the MiG, lacking hydraulic controls like the F-4, is hard to turn.
So I looked at him and I said, no, you can't do it. Broke into him and he overshot right down below me.
But the second MiG, 1,500 feet behind, rolls up to Cunningham's belly. Brian Grant and his Rio, Jerry Sullivan, tell Cunningham they'll take care of the second MiG, leaving Cunningham free to deal with the MiG that overshot him.
I put my nose on him and come through him. I get a Sidewinder tone and squeeze the trigger. missile literally went up his tailpipe and exploded.
It's Cunningham and Driscoll's third kill of the war. The MiG that had been under Cunningham's belly was still there. Cunningham accelerates, puts on 500 knots, and gets away from the MiG. Having escaped the danger, Cunningham and Driscoll decide to get more MiGs. They pitch up, go over the top, roll out in a maneuver known as an Immelmann turn, named for famed German ace Max Immelmann, and head back to the fight. Below, they see two Phantoms trapped in a wheel of 8 circling MiGs and in danger.
MiGs would fly in a wagon wheel, MiG-17, 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 all the way around, and there was 8 of them. The tactic that they use, if you get behind one of them, there'll always be a MiG behind you. If you don't get in there with them, you fly tangent to it and you go through and shoot them and then go out the other side and keep your speed up. But in that wheel was 2 other Phantoms.
As Cunningham starts to head in, an F-4 shoots out of the circle, so close they nearly collide. It's Commander Dwight Timm, Cunningham's executive officer, and Timm's Rio, Jim Fox. Timm is here. There's 2 MiGs on his 5 o'clock, which he sees. But he doesn't see a MiG-17 on his wing, closing in to attack. Cunningham falls in behind and calls for the F-4 in port turn to break away. With Timm's Phantom and the attacking MiG close together, the Sidewinder can't lock on to the enemy plane. If Cunningham fires, the missile could lock on Timm. Cunningham again warns Timm to break right.
He really yelled it out loud, at which point every F-4 out there broke right.
Timm, who'd been focusing on the MiGs at his 5 o'clock, now quickly accelerates. He brakes hard right. The MiG turns, but at this speed can't match the move. Some American pilots, referencing a popular TV show, Gomer Pyle, call the enemy pilots Gomer.
Knowing the enemy's airplane helps because a MiG-17 doesn't have hydraulically boosted controls. It takes a big Gomer in there to pull that pole when he's got all that speed and that G and then nose downhill.
Finally, Cunningham has a clear shot at the MiG. It is Cunningham and Driscoll's 4th kill. Then, 4 MiG-21s, watching the fight from above, decide to roll in for revenge. The MiG-21 is a fast, agile, and feared opponent.
It'd be stupid to take on a MiG-21 in his best operating envelope, which is higher. He out-accelerates you, out-climb you, and out-turn you. If you don't have the advantage, run, go home, come back the next day. Smart.
Cunningham decides it's time to retreat. He pulls hard and turns in the opposite direction from the MiGs, then heads back to his carrier. Nearing the coast at 10,000 feet, they spot a MiG-17 heading toward them.
I said, Willie, we got a MiG, 12 o'clock. Try and lock him up. He couldn't get a lock. And I said, I'm going to scare the blank out of this MiG. And so I passed right down with full intention, just scaring the heck out of him.
Cunningham's made an almost fatal error.
He started to shoot at us with his gun. We major mistake, perhaps we forgot that that's right, they have their gun equipped.
Vertical and roll to try and see him because Hanoi was that way. Any MiG that we ever engaged that hadn't had a real advantage, they'd run.
Cunningham and Driscoll looked back, expecting to see the retreating MiG.
Instead of running, he had pulled and gone vertical with me. Now I'm looking at probably 300-400 feet. Close enough I could look in and see a little set of Gomer goggles, little Gomer scarf that he had on his neck, and we're going canopy to canopy with a MiG-17 like this.
Cunningham lights his afterburners and climbs above the MiG. It's his second near-fatal error in minutes. The MiG is now on his 6 and opens fire.
It was a big mistake. And, you know, I was thinking about recovering from it, and, you know, your fangs come out at that point, and your mind says, okay, settle down, Duke.
Cunningham rolls off to the side to escape the deadly line of bullets. But the MiG matches his every move.
The only rule was there were no rules. It was a knife fight in a telephone booth.
After all they've been through, Cunningham and Driscoll are still in for the fight of their lives. May 10th, 1972. Randy Duke Cunningham and Willie Irish Driscoll have shot down 2 MiGs in a raid over North Vietnam. Now they're in the enemy's sights. They use all their training and skill, but the MiG-17 on their tail matches them move for move. Cunningham and Driscoll are determined to take the MiG down. But the Red pilot has more than luck. Most North Vietnamese pilots rarely fight in the vertical. They either fight in the horizontal or run. This pilot is different. He has skill, expertise, and a killer's instinct.
I look, and I'm looking right at his eyeballs. And I mean, it's like looking at a cobra ready to strike you. And that chill going through your spine, it's every emotion you've ever felt: fear, hate, anger, love. All of those emotions, magnify them 1,000%. And what helps you is that if you panic, then you're vulnerable. And that's where your training kicks back in.
Cunningham and Driscoll set a trap. They nose down to gain speed. The MiG, taking the bait, does the same. Cunningham pulls up, rolls over the top of the MiG, and gets behind him. It's a maneuver called the rolling scissors. Then the MiG uses Cunningham's maneuver and pulls up into him.
I overshot. And then I accelerate again and said, okay, this guy knows what a rolling scissor is.
Each aircraft attempts to roll into his opponent's 6 o'clock. They climb and roll, each fighter trying to get into attack position behind the other.
We're noting that this pilot is flying this plane very well, and he's also handling his weapon system very well. Very different from what we've encountered with the other enemy pilots. This fellow knew just what he was doing and just how to do it.
As the 2 jets maneuver, fighting gravity, they lose speed.
It was a 3-dimensional rolling fight, and we went through maybe 2 or 3 of these rolls. The last time we knew that as when we went up to the vertical, we were going to run the risk of stalling or go to 0 airspeed, in which case, if he had a little bit more airspeed than us, he was going to be able to kill us.
At low speed, the smaller MiG can outturn the big American jet. This is becoming the MiG's fight.
I don't fight his fight. I don't get into a turning fight with him because that's his fight. I'll force him into the vertical, or I'll force him to do something else that I want. When you set a trap for somebody, you also are cognizant that another good pilot could be setting a trap for you.
Cunningham knows it's time to turn the fight around. He fires his afterburners, dumping raw fuel into his exhaust to gain more speed. And at 600 knots, darts 2 miles away from the MiG, ending the rolling scissors. Cunningham and Driscoll take a second pass at the MiG, this time angled to the side so the MiG can't fire head-on. Then Cunningham climbs. So does the MiG, starting another rolling scissors.
He would force me to overshoot, use rudder, kick like this. Very experienced pilot.
As they keep in the rolling scissors, Cunningham loses speed and again risks making it the MiG's fight. is furious. The MiG has gained the advantage twice. For the second time, Cunningham hits his afterburners, puts 2 miles between his Phantom and the MiG, then roars back to attack. Cunningham puts his nose up 60 degrees and begins to climb. Again, the MiG follows him. Cunningham tries a trick he learned at Top Gun. He hits his air brake and idles his throttle, slowing down the Phantom. Cunningham knows the MiG is expecting him to overtake and pass, putting the MiG on the Phantom's 6. For Cunningham, slowing down is a dangerous move. He could easily stall and lose control of his plane, giving the MiG a huge advantage.
One of the things we always teach at Top Gun is we want our pilots to fly that airplane 1 inch from out of control at all times in a purposeful way. And that's what Duke is doing with this airplane right now.
It works. The MiG shoots out in front and above him.
It's like if you put on your brakes, a car is going to go by you on the highway. That's what I was trying to do to get him.
Finally, Cunningham and Driscoll have the advantage. If Cunningham had a gun, he could blow the MiG out of the sky. But all he has is missiles, and he's too close to use them.
But I made another mistake. I expected that relative motion to keep going like this, but he ran out of speed, and I ended up about 700 to 800 feet away from him. And I can't shoot him because the missile won't arm at that point unless it just hits him.
The MiG pilot knows he's in desperate trouble and rolls over the top, away from Cunningham and Driscoll. At the top of the roll, he briefly stalls and heads into a dive. He recovers with Cunningham and Driscoll behind him. The MiG heads for the ground, opening the range, but hoping the ground heat will prevent the Sidewinder's heat seeker from locking onto it.
He just kept running. So when he got nose to tail position, about 2,000 feet, I just stood on the rudder like this, pointed the nose at him and shot him.
It's Cunningham and Driscoll's 5th kill. They later discover that this great adversary may have been the legendary Colonel Toon, widely believed to be North Vietnam's leading ace. But celebrations will have to wait. Cunningham and Driscoll are a long way from home. With more MiGs closing in, they roll out and head for the coast.
And as I rolled, look up, I could just see a SAM coming, an SA-2. It's about the size of a telephone pole.
The SA-2 has a top speed of Mach 3.5, over 2,660 miles per hour. This missile can obliterate jets at 60,000 feet.
The first time you see a surface-to-air missile launched at you, the first time there's heavy anti-aircraft artillery, those are stressful, very stressful times. And even after all of the training, you never really know how you're going to handle that until the bullets are real.
So I saw this SAM, and I just started to break into it, which is lucky I didn't, because if I would have broken, this thing went off, it would have gone right through Willie and I through the cockpit.
Then the SAM explodes nearby.
Sounded like someone took 1,000 BBs and threw against, your car. And the airplane kind of shook itself a little bit.
Maybe 15 seconds later, Duke says, Willie, we're starting to lose PC-2. That was one of our main hydraulics. As he said that, I looked back over the left side of the plane. I noticed the left turtleback area of the plane. There's fire on the side of the plane.
The Phantom skids violently to the left. The backup hydraulics fail.
Duke comes back, Willie, we're starting to lose PC-1. PC-2 is going to 0.
Then, a pilot's worst nightmare.
The airplane all of a sudden rolled upside down, out of control. And I remember thinking, the only time I'd ever asked for divine help is when I got in trouble, you know, and I remember thinking, God, I don't want to be a prisoner of war. I don't want to die. Get my rear end out of this.
With the backup hydraulic system gone, Cunningham rolls upside down and tilts the nose up so it won't pitch down. He controls the Phantom with the rudders. They roll nearly 20 times, descending from 27 to 17,000 feet, but speed closer to the sea. To eject over land means becoming a POW. Every second they can keep flying brings them nearer to the coast and rescue. They stay with the plane as fire warnings blare.
You have to get through that and have a firm enough grip on yourself to get done what has to be done at the moment.
The Phantom spins violently downward. Cunningham and Driscoll are over enemy territory, on fire, and going down fast. May 10, 1972 started well for Randy Duke Cunningham and Willie Irish Driscoll. They killed 3 MiGs, but it may be one fight too many. Wounded by a SAM missile, they spin out of control over North Vietnam.
Now there was a fire about 40 feet behind us, and Willie said, Duke's getting hot back here. And I could see the fire out the mirrors, and I put the stick, and the airplane kind of righted itself, and I remember thinking, God didn't have anything to do with this, it was just my superior flying skills. But about that time, the airplane went back upside down, and I remember thinking, God, I didn't mean it, get me out of here. I rolled the airplane some 30 miles using only rudder and power until the tail actually blew off and the airplane went into a violent spin. Luckily, the radios were knocked out because there are people screaming at us on this tape. And they're saying, get out of that airplane in a spin over the beach, you know, get out of that airplane. I didn't hear any of that, which I was glad.
Mark, get out of that airplane. Get out of that airplane. Everyone's going down in a spin off the beach.
Finally, they clear the coast.
The plane flipped onto its back. I did pretty much a handstand off the top of the canopy. When he gave me the Willie eject, 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 we have an alternate handle between our legs. That was a struggle to get to it. I just got a couple fingers on it, and they always taught us in training to keep our arms in so we don't break our arms, but I was kind of bent like a pretzel. Pulled it, and then bam, he went off one direction, I went off the other. We had like rockets in the back of the seat, so the rockets fired us out.
325, no DME, about 5 miles off the beach. Okay, stick with those.
Moments after they eject, Showtime 100 crashes into the sea. They're quickly rescued. With 5 kills, Cunningham and Driscoll are the first aces of the Vietnam War. Their squadron, the Fighting Falcons, will have the most air-to-air kills of any Navy unit in Vietnam. Thanks to men like Cunningham and Driscoll, the Americans maintained total air superiority in the Vietnam War, forcing the North Vietnamese Air Force on the defensive. After Vietnam, Cunningham remained on active duty and served as an instructor at Top Gun, the Navy Fighter Weapons School. He retired in 1988. Driscoll retired in 1988, was asked to join the Navy Reserve in 1990, and is a frequent guest speaker at the Navy's Top Gun School.
That's why Top Gun and the Air Force Fighter Weapons School exists, to help our pilots learn in training what they're going to need to know in combat to keep them alive and protect our country.
Starting in 1973, the Phantom is replaced by the F-14 Tomcat. Because of the lessons learned in Vietnam, the Tomcat is armed with a gun and is a fast, nimble dogfighter, as are the later F-15, F-16, and the Navy's F-18 Hornet.
The F-18, for example, can, on a nose-low turn, can sustain 7.5 Gs. An F-4, by comparison, could only, in a situation like that, could sustain maybe 2 to 2.5 Gs. So it's a huge difference in performance ability.
But behind the technology, the basics remain the same.
If we have a missile, great, we can shoot them forward quarter. If we don't, we now have to apply those same concepts that Rickenbacker did and work ourselves behind him in the ability of shooting with our gun.
Modern fighters are also armed with the deadly 20mm Vulcan rotary cannon. It's a far cry from the 600 rounds per minute Vickers machine guns that forced Eddie Rickenbacker to close within 100 yards of his target. In the future, fighters like the F-22 Raptor will combine even greater maneuverability with higher sustained speeds and stealth technology that will render it nearly invisible to enemy sensors. The dogfight is one of war's most intense forms of combat.
There were so many times where a second here or there could have meant life or death.
There's another saying that I think encapsulates what it's like to be a fighter pilot. When he sees the enemy, he attacks and kills. Anything else is rubbish. That was spoken by Baron von Richthofen in 1916.
If you get a little bit sloppy, or a little bit careless, or if you don't remember and employ all of the things that you've learned, all of the procedures, all of the techniques, you can die very quickly.
The progress from World War I to the present is staggering. The SPAD-13 had a top speed of 130 miles per hour. The F-18 can hit 1,500. With aerial refueling, modern fighters have an almost unlimited range. Long-range modern sensors and missiles can strike to the horizon. But relying on high-tech can be a fatal mistake.
Radars go out, pilots make mistakes, missiles don't work. All kinds of things can happen during the mission to keep you from getting the kill that you think you're going to get at 25 miles and you don't get it at all.
Of the few who become fighter pilots, fewer still become aces.
I had gotten my 5th kill. I was now officially an ace, and I remember it made such an impression on me. While I was climbing out, I said, please, God, I know that you may have to take me before I get through this whole mess over here, but let me get home. Let me get home and tell somebody that I got my 5th kill and became an ace.
Manfred von Richthofen had 80 kills. Thomas B. McGuire with the United States Air Force had 38. Otto Kittel had 267. Now, all of these aces were successful because they applied tactics and techniques that were based on their strengths and their enemy's weaknesses. They took the fight to the enemy and fought on their own terms. But keep in mind, they also had one other thing in common. They were all killed in 1v1 air combat. You can't afford to let your guard down, and by no means should you ever go against your own recommendations or your own techniques.
You go beyond, you're going to lose the fight and possibly kill yourself and someone else.
What does make the difference between a great fighter pilot and a good fighter pilot? Call it a fighting spirit. You had to want to do it. You had to want to go up there every day and do it.
Dogfighting's obituary has been written time and again, and is always premature.
I just don't ever see our country being in a position to not need a courageous, gutsy fighter pilot to do the job when the job needs to be done.
If the pilot is well trained, aggressive, and has the will to win, he'll survive the ultimate test of air combat, the dogfight.